Internet, Mike and Andy here, and let me give you a weather update. I know you're absolutely dying to hear about the weather in Ohio, but it makes me question my salvation. It makes me question pretty much everything. This weather. So it's today. I know today it's mid-50s. We got some rain.
Hey.
All right, yeah.
I actually saw it's about to get a lot worse. Supposedly the storm that left us is supposed to annihilate you guys.
Here we go. All right, so tomorrow, we we'll open the day at 49, and then quickly drift down to 15. Okay, and then the lows for the next 4 days are like 7, 7, 7, 2, 5. Okay, so it's 50. And it's warm. I mean, Hannah and I went to our gym. We had short sleeves and shorts on because 50s out here, is like balmy.
It's summer weather. Get in the lake.
Oh my goodness! But I mean, this is insane. And I know people want to know. I know they want to know. The Midwesterners and the Canadians that listen to our podcast, they just are like, well, so what? This is winter. This is what it does.
Yeah.
But see, my memory of winter and the actual experience of winter are turning out to be two different things.
Oh, my goodness.
See, that's the issue. I mean, I knew I was coming back to winter. Of course, I knew.
Oh, dang.
But I was promised Columbus was milder
than
where I grew up.
Yeah, and I'm getting a total juke here, too, because I'm traveling out to Chattanooga this weekend, and when I checked earlier this week, it was like, oh, yeah, it's supposed to be in the, mid-50s. Now it's saying the high is 34, 37 and then 46 Saturday through Sunday.
That's right.
So that's a different story.
That's right. And the California people listening to this are just like, well, you're an idiot.
Who cares?
So you get what you deserve.
That's true.
We have mudslides.
Yeah, we get mudslides and droughts. And
and fires.
Yeah.
Oh, so bless you, Andy. So I hope you're just nice and warm. I've got to stack up on water and powdered milk. Because who knows? We have an ice storm coming.
Powdered milk. Gross.
I don't even know if that's a thing anymore.
It is. I'm sure it is.
It used to be a thing. So anyway, my friend, are you well?
I'm actually pretty good. Went to therapy this morning. Had a day of just
physical therapy.
No. Marriage therapy.
Oh yes. Awesome.
Yes. Naturally, every time I come out of therapy, whether it's just by myself or whether I bring Mercedes, I'm always just kind of sensey for the rest of the day.
Yep.
So, anyhow, but I'm good.
All right. So, are you an otter, a lion, a beaver, or a golden retriever?
Ooh. Well, immediately I'm going to go with lion, but unfortunately that's astronomically related, granted that I'm a Leo. So, it's kind of...
That's
I just
false.
drift towards that, so I don't know exactly what those metaphors are in your context.
I don't know. It was old school marriage counseling. So,
no, my marriage counselor is all about neurology, so naturally I just click in and nerd out on everything he gives me. So,
sure, and Mercedes loves it, I'm sure.
Oh yeah,
I don't care about your freaking neurons.
Yeah, your stupid brain. Just do something.
Right. Do something, right? All right, Andy. There's so much to be outraged about right now.
I know.
I mean, and again, we've talked about perpetual outrage and how damaging that is, but it's really funny. I mean, this is like the first week of January.
Yeah,
and it's insane.
We're warming up.
It is.
It's a warm up.
Oh, it is absolutely insane. So I want to try to get to two things. On this episode, we may not. The first one may take the whole time.
Okay.
The second one, is a beautiful article, written by one of our wonderfully Calvinist brothers, saying that doubt is slander against the Almighty.
Oh, okay.
Jesus died to save you from doubt, not to make space for it.
Oh, good.
So that's good.
I'm hoping that my tweet about that is what inspired you.
I missed that.
You did,
yeah.
I jumped on that. I thought that was just straight BS. So,
well, it seems very ungracious. But
yes.
Before we get to that, we have this kind of breaking news. Memphis thing happening.
Yeah.
Where and I'm coming late to this party, so I'm not even sure of some of the details. I've just seen it blow up because Newsweek's covering it, New York Times covered it, Washington Post covered it. But it started with a couple of like female bloggers who started digging some stuff up. But evidently, there was a teaching pastor, he's 37, who admitted to having a sexual incident with a young lady when she was 17 and he was 20, I think.
Yeah, something like
that. He was like on staff at a church. She was 17. Her account is that he took her to a remote area and forced her to do some things that she was very, very uncomfortable with.
Right.
So her account is an account of sexual assault.
Right.
So this thing kind of starts percolating last week, and then the teaching pastor and the head pastor of this specific church, the teaching pastor says, "Yep, he was involved in a sexual incident." And that at the time, and it's all over, Twitter. I mean, you can see his apology and he says that, he immediately regretted what had happened. He apologized to her family. He went to his church. He confessed. He went to, therapy. I mean, he did this whole kind of big thing. And the current church he works for, I think, knew about this. But he was last Sunday confessing kind of this before the congregation, and the congregation evidently gave him, after his confession and asked for forgiveness, gave him a 20-second standing ovation. So obviously, after the Golden Globes and all that was going on there, and in our current sensitivity to and awareness of sexual assault kind of environment, this is about as ugly a thing as we can get into. And so I want to read some parts out of the Washington Post article, and then we want to just talk a little bit about how churches maybe can handle this stuff. It's tough for two reasons. Number one, I don't know all the specifics, and so it's tough to make terribly harsh judgments. Right. On the face of it, it looks awful. But I've been a part of some of these things on the church leadership side. Not a crime, not a sexual assault issue, but infidelity or other moral failure,
inappropriate relationships.
And there's a sense that the story ends up being invariably more complicated than what you share with everybody. So I want to just talk a little bit about it because it's kind of blown up, and then talk about how maybe we can think about some of these things. And I don't mean in any way to set myself up as judge and jury for this church or this individual, because I don't know. Number two, I'm pretty major sinner myself, and so the biggest sinner in the room. I'm alone, but I'm still the biggest sinner in the room. Even if my wife were in here, barely would I be the biggest sinner, but it would still be me. But it'd be close. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So, because the big question. I mean, I think one of the big lingering questions out there is, well, what do you do with clearly the biggest sinner in the room? I mean, if that's the case too, what are we? How are we dealing with that? And then when we're faced up against laws of the land, so to speak, and that's happening, then what do we do too? Like, when do we actually call for protection and for let's let allegations play out and let's take this thing to where it goes. So anyhow, go on. That's
right.
All out
there. So you have two churches. You have the church that originally was involved, where he had done this. He says he went to them, and however that church handled it. And then you have his current church where he is serving and how they handle it. So those are two different journeys. About, okay, did they know, and they've backed him publicly in the face of all of this, and then the original church, how do you handle, something like that? So let me read some of the Washington Post article. A Memphis congregation's response to reports that a pastor sexually assaulted a woman when she was a teenager is forcing some evangelicals into their own Me Too moment. A young lady posted a detailed allegation that her then pastor sexually assaulted her as a teenager. In the message on the church's website, the pastor admitted to a sexual incident with that high school student, but did not name her specifically. The article then repeats the allegations, which I won't repeat because they're unsavory. Yet, and this is the Post again, yet instead of following the course of so many recent sexual harassment scandals, reports that have toppled careers in Hollywood, media, and politics, the pastor's public outing seems not to have upset his position. And then quotes from the pastor's apology, that he was deeply sorry, he could have done more for the victim. And then the Post reports his remarks were followed by a 20-second standing ovation. As conversations about sexual assault have overtaken politics, Hollywood, the news media, some Christians worry that the issue is not a priority within evangelical circles. Kate Lee Beatty, editor today, she's someone I follow on Twitter actually, tweeted that the emphasis on forgiving men in positions of power prevents evangelical efforts to combat sexual assault. This is from a tweet she wrote. Two themes here highlight why we won't see a Me Too outing in evangelical circles. Sexual abuse is framed, number one, sexual abuse is framed as individual sexual sin and not also a crime. And number two, the quickness to forgive male perpetrators who retain control of the story in the church community. So those two issues, the fact that it's framed as a sin, an individual sin and not a crime, and secondly, that because we are people of forgiveness, we forgive the people who stay in control of the story. So, a Pew Research poll suggests the majority of Christians take sexual assault seriously. When surveyed, 65% of white evangelicals said the issue of sexual assault and harassment is very important. 24% said it was somewhat important. But here again, then here comes the Trump and the Roy Moore issue. But white evangelical voters' recent support for various politicians facing sexual assault allegations have led some within their community to express concern about how things are being handled. Despite President Trump facing more than a dozen accusations of sexual assault, the majority of white evangelicals continue to approve of him, with one faith leader going so far as to call him the evangelicals' dream president. And more recently, white evangelicals overwhelmingly backed former Judge Roy Moore in his race for the Senate, and after several women accused the conservative Christian of sexual misconduct with them when they were teenagers and he was in his 30s. During that race, one Christian author said that evangelicals' ongoing support of politicians and public figures facing allegations of sexual assault suggests that tribalism is what is most important. We would call that the siege mentality, a term we took from David Brooks. Let's see. The victim said to a news outlet, Memphis's Action 5 News, that his apology, the pastor's apology, wasn't enough because, number one, he's lying about how he handled it. He never came to me. The church told him he couldn't talk to me and told me I couldn't talk to him. And then the pastor did not respond immediately to a request for comment. All right, so that's the summary of the article. Again, man, I feel so... I want to use this. I don't... On the face of it, this looks horrific, right? I mean, there's that word again because of the weather, horrific. On the face of it, this looks unbelievable. And it's what we pointed out with Roy Moore, and it's what we've pointed out with Trump. I mean, when you put partisanship over character, when you've been the character people for so long, right, you erode any sort of moral authority to speak into issues in the greater culture. And so this just furthers that narrative on the face of it. Particularly a 20-second ovation, and I get that. And I've read some comments, like, well, why did she wait, 20 years to say something, and aren't we supposed to forgive? And so I want to just give some thoughts, not that I'm in any way qualified to give thoughts, but to kind of give maybe a slightly different perspective on a couple of things. Make sense?
Oh yeah, sure. Let's
go. Did I wake you up? Did I wake you up?
Let's go.
So a huge point is that there's a difference between a sin and a crime. Not all things that the Bible talks about as sin are considered crimes legally, right? Pride.
Yeah.
Right? Lust, whether it's pornography or whatever, that's not obviously child pornography. I mean, there are examples of things the Bible clearly rules out that aren't crimes in the greater society, right?
Right. Even, in some, and on the flip side of that, even sharing the gospel in some places is a crime,
Right.
and obviously, and it's not a sin, so
Right.
that's the flip side of that same idea.
Perfect example, yes. So it works both ways.
Right.
So when there are sins in the community, and particularly the sins of leaders, there is this process of restoration and confession, and that I've seen, I've undergone a mini version of that myself, for nothing nearly as dramatic as any of these things, of course, but when I was much younger, I was involved with a young lady in transgressing boundaries that weren't okay, and went to my church leadership and said, hey, I'm really struggling in this area, and they were incredible, and they helped me work through just a whole bunch of stuff. So there is a place in the church, because we're people of grace and forgiveness, because we're people of renewal and hope, right? There has to be a place in the church community where restoration happens, right? Now, the negative word for that is called church discipline.
Right.
And the idea is that people can come under the discipline of the community for certain egregious, consistent, unrepented of sins. And there's an example in 1 Corinthians 5 of somebody that was so egregious that Paul, recommended the community just excise them from the community altogether, in the hope that this person would wake up and come to their senses. So a part of a healthy community, in the same way a part of a healthy family, has this part, this church discipline, this idea of restoration, particularly for leadership, but in big mega churches, it's tough because, you've got thousands of coming in and thousands leaving, and you have no idea what's happening.
Yeah.
So people typically restrict the practice of this to kind of high-level leaders or high-level volunteers or whatever. But there's a difference between that, which I'm a huge fan of, because the Bible is full of people who, are restored. I mean, Peter denies Jesus 3 times, and 50 days later he's restored,
Right.
To his ministry. Paul's murdering Christians. Abraham, cheats and lies to Pharaoh about his wife. Jacob is a manipulator. I mean, you have these. You have this glorious realism to the Bible where, okay, yeah, we are sinners. It doesn't surprise us that there's darkness, right? We because we believe in sin, we're not surprised.
Yeah.
So of course we're people of restoration and people of grace. But there is a sense that grace comes as repentance is embraced. And repentance, of course, Paul distinguishes between worldly sorrow and godly sorrow. Worldly sorrow is, be fearful of the consequences, which we all are when we sin, of course. But if that's all that is, then that's worldly sorrow, which leads to death. Godly sorrow is something that leads to repentance. It's the conviction of the Spirit. It's the work of God to wake us up to what it is that we're doing. And in those cases, when there is repentance, the church practices restoration. So I have no problem with a community saying, hey, this person has sinned. They are a part of our community. We will love them into their future. They must demonstrate the fruit of repentance. They must live within these certain boundaries. I mean, all of that is up to wisdom, discretion, discernment. Now, I say all of that to say, when it's a crime, that's an entirely different category.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the church did, the original church, with this issue, because that's when it should have been handled, right?
Right.
The original church, and again, I have no idea who, and I'm not casting judgment because I don't know. I have no idea what was said or what was not. I'm just saying from the outside, if the police were not consulted, if this woman was not interviewed and protected, and if she was shamed or told to be silent, for the sake of the reputation of the church, I mean,
Yes.
all of that is egregious.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of that is awful. Should the police have been called? Absolutely. Right? I mean, in churches, at least in California, I'm sure it's the same in Ohio, we were mandatory reporters.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have a choice. Clergy
Right.
privilege does not protect against the reporting of crimes, right? I mean, so
right.
absolutely. So however this early church, and again, I don't know, and I'm not saying anything specific about them because I don't know, but you would have thought that if this indeed were assault, that the young lady would have been believed. If indeed this pastor confessed what he had done, then the outside of dealing with the sin issue, the young lady they quoted is absolutely right. It's a crime.
Yeah.
And you have to take sexual assault unbelievably seriously. Now, I can hear responses from people who will say, well, why'd she wait 20 years? The world is full of false accusations, and people can be brought down, but obviously he confessed to something and still has.
Right.
So
Go ahead. What's interesting to me is that women who are coming out now about things that have happened X amount of years ago, outside of celebrities, I don't see many of them gaining some form of individual power by doing it.
Right.
As if it's like that agenda is like, well, they're just trying to get this attention that they need, or this is going to help them expand their social media account, or, I mean, you could say
Right.
those things, but at the end of the day, you're kind of like, it's kind of how what we've talked about in the Bible, where when we look at these circumstances that play out through different characters, it's like there's no reason that you would bring attention to that, because in that day and age, that would be a shameful thing. Like, why would
Right.
we look at, take honoring these things now when back then, like, people would be killed for that? I mean, there's some of that to me, at least when I read some of this stuff, then I'm like, there's nothing to gain here for this young girl who's bringing this out into the light. Like, I don't, and obviously, all details aside, I mean, we're just reading things and trying to understand things as they kind of surface this way. But I have to feel like, in some sense, that because more, like it is, because more women are speaking out about a lot of this stuff, there's this sense of safety that's in it. The same idea that it's like when a community is created in which, certain things can be confessed that were previously shameful and or dangerous and harmful to oneself, now it feels like if I have a place I can voice this, and at least now I feel
Right.
like the truth is out. Right?
Right.
And so, I mean, that to me seems like the overall narrative of so many women that have come forward to talk about these. I mean, this is some, I say quote unquote random, because it is for us, some random teaching pastor in Memphis that's now being outed by some girl who we pretty much have no idea is. And obviously it's gotten national notice now.
Yeah.
So this isn't, between, I could, on a second level, taking it past celebrity attention, to me, I'm like, yeah, I don't blame her. I can kind of see at least some reason to be like, oh, why would she wait so long to come out and talk about this? It's just like, come on. I mean, how long have we been suppressing, female voices in the church? It's like, are we really that surprised? And that's
Yeah, but people would say, well, maybe she's angry and vindictive. She just wants to get revenge on him. Maybe she.
But then I'd ask the question. But why? Why do you feel that way? What happened to you that would even spawn that type of I mean, that's going to tell a story. The second you start asking those questions, though, it's going to pin back to something. And great, if it all comes out that it's like it was a fraud, I mean, then the truth would be known. You know, I mean, if you're going to get this much public attention,
it's obviously not that, because he's confessed to something,
right?
And so, I mean, maybe the early church, you know, the earliest church with this guy,
right?
Maybe because they saw he was repentant, maybe they didn't want to, you know, ruin his career or whatever as a sexual,
or life.
Yeah. I mean,
Right.
maybe that was their thinking. Maybe it was like, well,
Sure.
this was an honest mistake. I mean, I can't speak to whatever judgment was made there, but it does seem like how she describes it, if that's how it happened,
Right.
then that is a really damaging move to not have brought the police in to that.
Yes.
And then to have this come out 20 years later, and you know, I'm not sure why the congregation was clapping. Certainly a 20-minute standing ovation would not have been given to the woman.
Yeah. Well, because at the end of it, he's probably just like, and you know what? Because under the power of the Holy Spirit and through Jesus Christ,
you can watch it. He didn't do that. He didn't do that.
All right.
He said over 20 years ago, when I was a college pastor, you know, this happened, and I want to ask your forgiveness, and here's how I handled it then. And I mean, you know, as apologies go, it was fine.
Sure.
But and I'm sure the church wanted to support him. But, you know, the question is, of course, if they had brought the woman up front and she had shared her side of the story, would she have gotten the same 20-second standing ovation, you know?
Right.
And that's precisely the point. The power differential,
Yes.
you know, it was big then, but it's even bigger now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I thought, you know, I really thought the church, if I mean, and this is the thing that's so irritating, Andy. There's no moral authority on jack squat, right? Not that we thought we ever had some, but man, our own house is so dirty that we can hardly speak on anything. And it just breaks my heart that, because I can only imagine the number of people who haven't spoken out, who've been abused by clergy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and have been told to be silent and told they're sinning or told it was their fault, or, you know, you just see the toxicity of some of the religious subculture, and you just grieve it like crazy. And it's not only hurt all these men and women who've been abused, but it has so compromised our witness to the world.
Yeah.
And you know, so you get a headline that's like, hey, church claps for pastor who sexually assaulted a teenager.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my Lord.
Yeah.
Oh, and then of course that's lumped in with the support for Roy Moore and President Trump, and you know, then you have the narrative, right? I mean, we just care more about power, and often this is done in the name of reputation, right? The reason we don't want this spilling over to the police is because we got to protect our reputation. And we see the fruit of how damaging that is, right? Because our reputation would be much more enhanced by being honest, and coming forward, and, you know, whatever else.
Right. I know. Like, there was a movie. Was it Traffic? When Benicio del Toro. Do you remember that movie?
I remember the movie Traffic. I have no idea what scene you're talking about.
I think is it Traffic? It's around that same time, or it's not 20. It's or maybe it's 21 grams. But there's this movie with there's Benicio with Benicio del Toro in it, and he's a pastor. He's like a Catholic priest, right? And
I've never seen this.
Yeah, he hits someone in his car, and he kills him. And then he like goes on for a while, like living in the guilt of like having done this kind of thing, right? you know, at the end of the movie, it's like he finally like basically self-confesses, like ends up like, you know, confessing that he did this, ends up like he's like, I have to pay my time, and his wife and he has a couple young kids, and she's just like, you can't go to the police, you can't confess, but he's so burdened by the moral conviction of like, I've killed somebody, like I have to, like I can't live with myself, you know, unless I like kind of bring about just what the, you know, the normal like the narrative for justice. It's just like it's one of those movies where there's 4 other stories going on at the same time, and this is like one story that's happening. And it's kind of the redemption story out of all the 4 that shows this crazy picture of like this guy who goes through this thing and then ends up like being so convicted by it that he actually like goes to the police and confesses what he's done, because he's like, I have to confess my sin. You know, just sitting in that, even though it would cost him, you know, the separation from his family and all of these things. And you're kind of like, you actually understand the complexity of this moral divide, because you're like, well, do you hide it and then you take care of your wife and your kid for the rest of your life and you live with this thing? Or do you confess and go to the police and hope for grace and justice and whatever pans out next? Right. You know, I mean, that's just such a fascinating kind of circumstance, because when you look at this, the natural thing was he was okay. Let's presume that if he went to this first church and confessed and said, because the first article I read was like he went to the first church and their move was like protection, like in that she was barred from being talked to, like he ignored her, he didn't talk to her, like they quickly kind of silenced her. And so, but then again, it's like this guy, if that's true, then he lived with that. You know, and then he moved forward with that. Like but then to the fact that he then still goes and confesses this actually happened. It's just this line between a crime and then a sin, but it's like there's more margin within like the evangelical church of, well, is it really a crime or is it a sin? In Alabama, you can marry a 14-year-old, so technically like the age differential doesn't play as much of a role. I mean, it's like, oh man, that is just such a mess. You know? And
yeah. I mean, this guy, this pastor, I mean, I put myself in his situation, and he's got probably a family and kids, and you know, for him, he confessed, he told the proper authorities, at least in his mind, he wasn't carrying it around in the same way Benicio was, right? Because he went to his church, he told people. Now, I don't know if he told them the truth, I don't know if he told them what was accurate, I have no idea. But you just go, oh my goodness, you know, and there's no resolution to this. I mean, how do we even get to the place where you can say, you know, one thing or the other than
okay, what about Paul's example though? So you know, no one would make the case that Paul teaching the gospel was going around sinning, right? But because of what he was doing, he was constantly thrown in jail. Right. And he took on, okay, I'm going to go to prison because these are the things that I'm doing. But abides by the law of the land, even though he knows what he's doing in the eyes of God is perfectly okay.
Yeah.
Right? So he lives with the consequence of understanding, like, yeah, I am actually confessing to the fact that I'm breaking the law. But I'm willing to, like, do that because of the other side of that is, like, these are laws of the land. If I have to pay the justice for that, then fine, I will pay that. But recognizing that what I'm actually doing is not a sin before God. Right. You know, so it's like, I mean, that's... Right. You know, that to me is the moral opposite of what this is.
Yes, Paul even says, Paul has this incredible thing in 1 Corinthians where there are lawsuits being leveled by believers against believers, I think.
Right.
And he says, why would you take this in front of non-believers? Why not? Wouldn't you rather be wronged than to bring the name of Christ disgrace?
Right. Yes. I mean, that to me, that's what I've thought about in all of this. Because I'm like, okay, he's actually confessing this happened. He's saying, yes, she was underage and I was overage. Black and white, even in the state of Tennessee, wait, what's it, Texas? Which Memphis is it? I couldn't remember. I think it's Texas. Even in that state, if it's a crime, then that's exactly what we're talking about. Like, he's dragging the church into this circumstance in which if what it is true, she's underage and he's overage, and this circumstance happened this way, then that's exactly what he's doing. You know, so it just seems baffling to me that, I don't know. the only framework I have is the opposite of Paul's situation, where I'm like, well, this guy was willing to serve his time in prison and go through that scenario under the circumstances in which he was like, well, I'm not going to like I will go to the prison because what I'm doing, like I realize that before God, this is what he wants me to do, but I realize I'm breaking the laws of the land. But these aren't like,
Right.
all the other crimes he's talking about. Whereas this is like literally the polar opposite. Like, hey, I did this thing. I think it's a crime.
Well, I don't know.
I don't know. I'm just going off the first article I read. If what I read was whatever 75% true. I mean, if she's even if she's 18, even if she's over age, it's like, okay, then we're looking at allegations, we're looking at behavior stuff. If she's underage,
Right.
then it's like, okay, we're talking about stuff that's just pretty much on paper. Like, this is like,
Right.
You can't do this.
Yeah.
So, that's to me, that's more of my issue with it. It's like, well, Paul seemed to go through a lot worse for not doing. Well, he killed a lot of Christians, so I don't know. Maybe he just maybe it was a late kind of justice. He's like, you know what? Maybe I do need to spend some time here. I've killed a bunch of brothers.
Right? No, I don't know. I have no idea. I know Paul carried that later into his life. He refers to himself as the chief of sinners. And talks about how he's least of the apostles and those sorts of things. And he references what he was before he became a Jesus follower. So I don't know. The big issue for me is, how does the church create space for these sorts of issues? Now, because you can go like hardcore one of two ways. One way is that you discipline everything, and we've seen some abuses, like a lot of abuses that way. I've heard of and had first-hand knowledge of stuff that, is really heavy-handed, legalistic, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not restoration. It's like, you're done. And does not appreciate this huge thread of restoration and forgiveness in the scriptures. But then you've got, on the other side, you've got this incredibly lackadaisical, hey, we're all in process. We're all sinners, and that's true. But yet, if we're really going to be the counter public, to use Muehlhoff's words, if we're really going to be a counter narrative to the world, there has to be a sense that that we give permission for people to unveil the messiness of their lives, but there's also the invitation and the help towards transformation too, right? And so how do you create a space where women who've been silenced can now speak and have authority? And so part of what we've been, trying to do in a very small way has just been to say, well, we need women in leadership. Because I would guess that had women been in leadership, and maybe they are, maybe I'm totally wrong, I don't know. But my guess is if women had been in leadership that first time, when this was originally confessed,
That's interesting.
it would have been handled differently.
Right.
Or if women were in leadership now, well, yeah, I'm guessing. But I would suspect that there would have been a bit more, urgency or taking the crime part more seriously, whatever. And again, I hate doing this because we're totally speculating on stuff we have no knowledge about. I'm just trying to use it as a talking point to say, hey, here's a real person that's been hurt. Here's a church that has embraced the pastor in his confession. The media gets wind of it, and it's now hey, church, cheers for a guy who's confessing sexual assault. So it's so tricky, and that's why I'm just so nuancy about it, because I don't know anything, and my opinions of it would change with all sorts of new information, right?
Yeah, of course. If we took I guess I'm saying if we took the black and white, if we're still speaking in hypotheticals, and maybe you said this early on, is that, if this is brought to our attention now, let's say it's like, hey, 20 years ago, I committed, what at that time would be considered a crime. I worked for this church. I was a youth pastor. basically had an inappropriate relationship, and furthermore, this is the circumstance that let's just say that like this account is actually all true. What does the church do? I mean, it's like, okay, you caused a crime. I mean, because to me, it's like there's these two things that play out. Spiritually speaking, okay, we can relationally, community-wise, we can talk about reconciliation, we can talk about forgiveness, we can talk about the way in which sin is held and how the community handles that is in our further relationship beyond the crime. But simultaneously, was it and is it inappropriate for church leadership to protect this circumstance under this veil of, well, we're a people of peace, so we practice forgiveness.
Right.
Versus, bro, you got to go to the police and you got to confess this. Like, it's just like you committed a crime. Or we will. Right. It's like you committed a crime. Like, it has to be, like, even now, I'm coming to you saying 20 years later this happened.
Okay, so I just this is real time.
Oh, yeah.
Andy Bear. The pastor is evidently being interviewed by a friend on radio.
Okay.
Now, again, I don't know if this is true, but this person is tweeting that what the pastor is saying during the interview is that he and this young lady that the young lady was flirting with him, and they began heavy petting. And if you don't know that word, then you did not grow up in the church. Heavy petting is not just something that happens in zoos.
Yeah.
And so that's all it said was,
the mess is though that it's like if she's underage, that's all that matters. If the law of that state suggests that if she's underage, and even that's the case.
Well, yeah, I don't know.
I know. I'm just saying, like,
17.
Hypothetically, if that's the situation, the consensual thing. I mean, that's statutory rape. I mean, that's like that's how that turns out. So it's, it's like, because here's what's going to happen is that the mud of all of this, because like now we're talking about, okay, let's start responding more in this media kind of mass backlash kind of way. Well, we can kind of nuance how things are said. I mean, come on, how much have we seen this in politics? I mean, like, oh, let's locker talk. Like, I mean, we immediately dismiss the black and white of kind of what's on paper. Like, no one's talking about like, okay, she's just underage. Like, regardless of if she initiated, if you're the adult, you're 20 years old and she's 17, you're supposed to be the wiser. That's just how this goes. Like, you shouldn't have gone there, And so,
and let's say they were, that she was flirting and whatever else.
Right.
That still doesn't justify assaulting her, forcing her to do something that she didn't want to do.
Right.
But anyway, I mean, my mind was blown as you're talking about this, and I pick up Twitter just to see if anything had happened, and boom, he's on the radio. But, and again, man, I bless this guy. I don't know. I don't even know why I said bless this guy. I want the truth to come out, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But it raises this big issue of how we handle this stuff in the church. And I think you're absolutely right. The way to hide it isn't more, or the way to deal with it isn't more hiding.
No way.
It can't be. It's almost like we have to be the leaders in dealing with this seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that grace abounds in hiddenness. I mean, that's something maybe we could talk about.
That's
like,
true.
It's kind
that's
of
true. No, that's very good. That's very good.
That's just it. It's like, okay, if this is, because when it first happened, if it wasn't if it was something that like couldn't be criminal in the first place, I don't know. I mean, obviously that shapes the story, because if it's not criminal, then okay, then bury the thing, whatever.
Exactly, and that's why I was distinguishing between a crime and a sin.
Yeah, I know, and so maybe that's the thing that's going to get investigated, but it's hard. I mean, yeah, of course, like 20 years later. You lose what is it? Like, Godless gives us crap for this all the time. Like, you lose the verifiability of a witness. The longer time that goes on, the unlikelihood you can remember it as well. And so it's just like, dang it, and that sucks.
Right.
That just sucks.
And if he is saying in any way, shape, or form that she contributed to this,
right?
I mean, then you're like, oh my goodness. Now, I love. I don't remember who tweeted this, but somebody said the church must lead the way in cleaning house over sexual abuse. We dishonor God if we expect those outside the church to be held responsible for their sinful criminal behavior, and applaud those guilty of the same actions in the church. Yep. And see, so I would say, just one final thought. I think this will take up our whole time.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. And I would say this. I think there is biblical precedent for people who have sinned to be brought back into leadership. Yeah. There are some who say that, if you sin in certain, and now that's not true for every sin, certainly. But after a period of, examination and therapy and whatever by a council of really wise people, I think it absolutely should be the case that that people can be restored to ministry. Yeah. Absolutely. Because if you don't allow for that possibility, then pastors will never be honest.
Yeah, I think to me it is the how over the what. I
sure.
mean, this is
we can have a how conversation, but I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But for a crime, I think there should be the thing ought to click up like 3 or 4 levels.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean, but say a convict. Okay, let's say a convict who was actually admitting of their crime. And they spent 20 years in jail, and then they came out.
I've had this happen.
Okay.
Where people who've been convicted of crimes come to a church, and they're asking to be a part of the community.
Right.
And so wisdom means that you place appropriate boundaries, and if there are some things you'd never allow. If somebody's a convicted child molester, you never let them work in children's ministry, right? I mean, you obviously.
Right.
If somebody was dealing drugs, or embezzled money, I mean, you don't trust them with the offering,
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of
Yeah.
like,
right.
Kind of like those sorts of things, but the church has to be a place where reformation happens. So I do think, because I've been reading some articles of people just saying, listen, now somebody like this can never be restored to ministry. Well, if it's a sin, then I think there's restoration that's possible. Yeah. If it's a crime, then it depends. But I think the level of confidence, it clicks up a ton, that you have to have for someone convicted of a crime to be placed in leadership. I mean, it should be years before they're trusted. They don't just wait a year, say they're sorry, and then go down the road and start another church.
Yeah, for sure.
But we see that happening, right? We see big name church leaders brought under discipline, and they just say, screw it. Even though they're fired, they'll start their own ministries over, and boom. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a sense in which, and again, it's so nuanced that it's tough to really say for sure that, of course, it's a how conversation. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's all how you would restore somebody, what sort of repentance they would have to demonstrate. I mean, blah, 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 blah. No question about it. But at the same time, you take an instance where if sexual assault really happened and it was not taken seriously by that first church, then it has to be taken seriously by the second one.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yep. Yeah, for sure.
And and I don't know I don't know what that means. I don't know the details. They know far more than I do in terms of what's happened. But I would certainly be on the horn with this young lady, trying to get them both in a room going, what the heck? And maybe that's not the best. Maybe that's not the best for her. I don't even know. I mean, I said that very flippantly, but
sure.
I would certainly want her to speak with the same amount of, I was going to say publicity, but I mean the same amount of like publicness.
Well,
as he had a chance to.
But what's interesting is, like, even then, I don't know that she's even given a fair voice. I mean, come on, we have the social media. Her speaking out has actually created. She has the largest platform over this guy attending his church. His church is a blip on the map compared to how many people this has come to. The problem is that it's everything we've talked about. How we can't, because the details are so gray, because it's 20 years later, even when you know, cross-examine a witness that's been, removed from it for that period of time, there's only so much information that holds up.
Right.
And so the sad and tragic part about this is, even if this is taken to the farthest stretches of court, where we're dealing with gray information, it's hearsay at this point almost, and that to me is what's tragic about it. But she has, even if she's given a voice now, everyone's a troll at the same time. It's not like given voice to the spaces in which it actually can accomplish the proper justice it needs to. I mean, even if the church put her on the stage, who's got the advantage there? He's going to come up after her and still confess and all this, and the audience is going to be like, yeah, see, our pastor knows how to be vulnerable and how to confess and all this stuff, and she's still going to look like, tiny. That to me is where I'm sitting in all this. I'm just like, time is the biggest enemy on this thing, and it only makes it worse. When there's this audience, this other niche audience that responds a certain way to. Now, if this guy, because it's different, if the pastor had actually kind of just immediately interacted with her on Twitter and then ignored his church and actually confronted her on the same platform she did.
Right.
Well, okay, let's now look at the responses in which then it's in the same platform. But for this guy just to go into his, even if he was saying, oh, well, our church is 10,000 people, it's like, yeah, but we're talking at this point now. There's millions of people this has reached. That's still peanuts in comparison. So I know all of this unfortunately is just commentary. I mean, it's got to be. It's just the hypothetical realities of if the details are the worst case scenario is that everything this girl is saying is true, right? Then what do you do? Because the thing that bums me out is that the likelihood that story is true for many other women out there is probably a pretty stark possibility. Right. And that's the part that I grieve the most, is that it's like, yes, the church, both denominational and non-denominational, has a history and a record of definitely protecting certain things in which never reach the criminal public. And so, come on, let's talk about, the Boston, Catholic Church exposure, back in the, in the 90s, it's just like, dude, at that point, we're talking like tens of thousands of people that were involved. So it's just, that's the sad story, is that story carries on. And now this is just what we're staring at. So I think your point is good. If a woman was in power at that time, that situation might have looked a lot different, even if the worst case scenario was true.
Right.
And even if it wasn't, that situation would still look a lot different. And now you'd be able to at least call up a witness now of a woman who was involved and say, here's actually how it happened. I was unbiased and subjective to it and objective to it, but we don't have it.
Well, Andy, I'm excited to talk about other things at some point.
Yep.
But, man, this is just heartbreaking in so many ways.
It really is.
It is. And there's so much good happening through the Me Too stuff. Mm-hmm. The light being shown in dark places. I mean, you can't help but applaud. You can't help but applaud that stuff. I mean, you just are like, man, you see, well, how did you describe it? The seed, this is the fruit bearing of seeds of just marginalizing women for, decades.
Yeah.
And, so there's a sense in which this is beautiful, and, another sense where I just grieve.
Oh yeah.
The harm done and the culture that's been created in the church in some places, obviously not all,
right, but
in some places where this is put up with, this is tolerated, this is women are silenced if they're going to criticize a pastor. So
right,
I just am sad by it. So
yep.
My brothers and sisters, may us
have a happy Monday after this conversation.
Seriously, may we still be purveyors of hope. Because I think of it this way: we believe in grace, so we're never surprised, right? But we also believe in redemption, so we never give up hope,
right?
We believe in restoration, we believe in renewal, And so we have to be a people who are the most realistic about human nature, but also at the same time the most optimistic about what God can do with people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tough line. That is a tough line to walk. So, brothers and sisters, please don't hold us please don't hold us super accountable for clarity of thought on this. This is just more of us reacting in time to something we've read a little bit about.
Right.
We're not trying to take sides. We want to talk about the bigger issue this raises.
Yeah. Yep.
What were you going to say, buddy?
I was just going to say that it's definitely just a response vaguely to the amount of vague details we have. I mean, there's enough to show that there's, something worth responding to, but yeah, sure. You're right. I mean, without, you're looking at multiple articles with multiple agendas and trying to figure out what's the truth, where's the details, who's telling the truth. And, but at the end of the day, it's like, well, unfortunately, I wish so badly this was the first time that we'd heard something like this, right?
Right.
But the sad thing is how many cases have there been where this has happened, and the truth was it really did happen. So it still asks the question, we still constantly need to wonder, what do we do as church leaders, as churches, when this stuff happens? What is the most appropriate response? How do we honor what's supposed to be honored? And actually walk this out the way that God would want us to walk us out and what He would think is appropriate. That question is still valid, so it's a worthy conversation.
Yep.
So,
all right, well, brothers and sisters, hallelujah. Come, Lord Jesus, quickly. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine His face upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up His countenance to you, and may He give you peace in these crazy days. Till next time, my friends, thanks for listening.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Vox Podcast. Learn more about us at voxpodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at the Vox Podcast, and now support us on Patreon at patreon.com/voxpodcast.